Ukraine would need to give up territory to Russia and slash the size of its military under a new peace plan approved by U.S. President Donald Trump. That's according to a draft of the plan worked out between Washington and Moscow. The proposal puts Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy under pressure to make concessions at a time when his nation is increasingly under attack.
Search teams in Ternopil are still looking for missing people on Thursday, after the town was struck by a Russian attack that killed at least 28 people. Meanwhile, in Kyiv, US Army Secretary Dan Driscoll meets with the Ukrainian president to brief him about a 28-point peace plan that the United States and Russia have reportedly been negotiating behind closed doors without Ukraine. And Kyiv expects deeper talks about the plan in the coming days.
And we agreed that the teams will work on these proposals to ensure it's all genuine. We will not make any sharp statements and are committed to clear and honest work. Ukraine, the United States, and our friends and partners in Europe and the world.
According to the news agency AFP, the proposed plan would include Ukraine giving up the Donetsk and Luhansk region, which Russia largely controls already, Kyiv not being allowed to join NATO, but NATO fighter jets being based in Poland to protect Ukraine, and Ukraine's army being reduced by around a third to 600,000. The White House didn't comment on details.
The president supports this plan. It's a good plan for both Russia and Ukraine, and we believe that it should be acceptable to both sides, and we're working very hard to get it done.
And the European Union has its doubts about the proposal, once more expressing distrust in the Kremlin.
Russia has repeatedly paid lip service for peace talks, and previous talks fell apart because Russia never made any real commitments. The pressure must be on the aggressor, not on the victim. Rewarding aggression will only invite more of it.
Once again, tough weeks lie ahead for Ukraine and President Zelenskyy, who's currently under pressure at home over a major corruption scandal within his administration. Zelenskyy has previously dismissed similar peace proposals, and it seems that a deal between Russia and Ukraine is still a long way off.
With me now is Andrew Denary, Associate Director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me.
So how much do we know about the details of this U.S.-Russia peace plan?
So I think there are a few things we know about this plan and a lot that we don't know. One thing we do know is the Trump administration has changed its negotiating strategy a little bit, whereas in previous rounds or attempts at negotiating a peace, they'd tried negotiating with Russia or Ukraine and then Russia or Ukraine, but now they're trying to, it seems, do both tracks simultaneously, which is why we see Special Envoy Witkoff talking with his counterpart, Mr. Dmitriev from Moscow, and then a U.S. Army Secretary in Kyiv to brief Zelenskyy on a peace plan. So they're trying to do two things at once, not necessarily a bad strategy. The contents of what we know of the peace deal is not positive for a durable peace right now. But one thing that we should stress is that both sources close to Witkoff and sources close to the Secretary of the Army who are in Kyiv and Secretary Rubio have said that this plan is more a set of ideas and that elements of this plan are changeable. So there is still room for maneuvering here.
And why are we seeing this now? I mean, Trump threatened last month to send Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine if Russia didn't return to the negotiating table. So there was, for a while, hesitance by Russia to even negotiate at all. Does this new plan have anything to do with those threats from Trump against Russia?
I think there are a few elements here. About a month ago, Secretary Rubio got on the phone with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov to try to organize a U.S.-Russia summit in Budapest. But they were not able to hash out the right terms. They were not successful. And the U.S. side was clearly very frustrated with Moscow. So it's possible, especially if we take the press secretary Caroline Leavitt's comments today, that the U.S. side had been working for the past month quietly on this proposed deal. that this is something along the lines of, oh, Russia, you're not happy with the terms we've given you. Well, we're going to decide this for you, and we're going to lay things out on our own, and you can take it or leave it, and we'll take it to Kyiv as well. So I think that's one part of it. It's also quite possible that there's just sheer impatience on the side of the Trump administration. We know the president himself has said he thought he'd be able to get this done much faster. So I think those are two major elements coming together. And clearly the White House thinks they'll be able to get this done relatively quickly. I'm not sure whether that's going to happen, quite frankly.
And based on what we do know about this proposal, does Russia appear to be making any concessions here, or is it making even less concessions than it was, let's say, a year ago when Trump started to negotiate between the two countries?
The plan, as we understand it, gives Russia basically everything it wants. And, the only thing that the U.S. gets is peace, which certainly is a major thing, but we haven't really seen the U.S. put significant pressure on Russia. We've seen the sanctions from a few weeks ago, which were very good, but there's still lots of pressure that could be done to get Russia to negotiate in real terms. Of course, the Russians, to be honest, could still reject this plan. They could ask for even harsher restrictions on the Ukrainian military, or even more political change in Kyiv, which has been previous conditions that they've laid out. And honestly, that's not out of the question, because we have seen over past rounds of negotiations that it is the Russian side that has repeatedly refused to agree to a peace deal, while Kyiv has been quite willing to work with the Trump administration in coming to a sustainable, real peace deal.
But does that have to do with the reality on the ground? I mean, Russia has been making recent gains on the battlefield, and that might encourage Moscow to believe that it can make more demands on Ukraine in order to seal some kind of ceasefire here.
Russia certainly has made some small gains on the battlefield after months of trying and at quite heavy cost. But the underlying fundamental here is that Moscow and its leadership under President Volodymyr Putin don't think Ukraine is a country, want to destroy it, want to destroy Ukrainians and Ukrainianness. And so the terms they're looking for in a deal, if they are to agree to a deal, would be something that gives them the conditions to do exactly that. Failing that, they will either continue the war, or if faced with enough pressure from the West, stronger battlefield resistance from Ukraine supplied by Western countries, then they'd be forced to negotiate in real terms. But otherwise, Russia is quite happy to try to extract as many concessions as possible to allow to either continue the war or in the future set the conditions for doing so.
Okay, Andrew Denary, Associate Director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. Thanks for your analysis.
Thank you.
And our coverage continues now with Michael Kimmage. He's director of the Kennan Institute, and he joins us from Washington, D.C. Michael, it's good to have you with us. So let me ask you, President Zelenskyy, apparently he's got a peace proposal in his hand. What does he do now?
I think what he does is to try as best he can not to alienate Washington, not to anger President Trump, but in the most polite terms, presumably reject the logic of this peace proposal, which is antithetical to Ukraine's core national interests.
Well, isn't that exactly what will enrage President Trump?
I think a lot depends on the manner of the rejection, and I think President Zelenskyy has learned since a tumultuous Oval Office meeting back in February how not to make himself the story, to appear grateful when he can, and to flatter Trump in various ways, but at the same time not to bow down to President Trump. And I think so far Zelenskyy has done that pretty well over the last few months, and it's possible he can do it again.
What about the Europeans? They also apparently have been bypassed by Washington as well as Russia. What can they do? What should they do now?
It's not the first time that the Trump administration has reached out directly to Russia, and it's not the first time that the Trump administration seemingly has endorsed elements of the Russian narrative or of the concessions that Russia is seeking from Ukraine. So I think, again, it's rather similar to the Ukraine story. Obviously, Europe is going to reject this peace proposal and not be a party to it and not be a part of it, but probably in a way that's subdued, quiet and, at least on the surface, very polite and respectful toward what the White House is trying to accomplish.
I spoke earlier today with a former prime minister from Ukraine and about the situation with the war, and he said that only Europeans can help his country at this point. I mean, what leverage then do the Europeans have with Putin and with Trump?
Europe's leverage is considerable because Europe is, at this point, the major military backer of Ukraine. The U.S. provides intelligence and targeting and is selling weapons to Europe and to Ukraine to use on the battlefield, but the U.S. has pulled back a lot in the last 8-9 months, which corresponds to a diminishment in American leverage, and subsequently there's been a quite big increase in European leverage. So Europe's leverage at the moment is not diplomatic, it's military, but it's very real.
And on top of all of this, there's domestic considerations apparently for the Ukrainian president. Zelenskyy, he's under pressure because of a corruption scandal that is still looming. Does this, in your opinion, does this make him even more vulnerable in the eyes of Washington and Moscow?
I think in the eyes of Washington and Moscow, yes, that there's a corruption scandal, but there's also been some bad military news and probably more to come in the next few months. But I don't think it makes President Zelenskyy less vulnerable in his own eyes. He still has much to work with. Roughly 80% of Ukraine's territory is under Ukrainian control. And in some respects, especially in Germany, military support in Europe for Ukraine is being augmented. So it's not as if Zelenskyy is in a weak position, but he's perceived as being in a weak position in Washington and Moscow.
Michael Kimmage, as always, Michael, we appreciate your time and your insights tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I want to go now to our correspondent, Jack Parrock. He is in Brussels following that press conference that you just saw. Jack, President Zelenskyy, he says that he's been given a plan from the U.S. There are no reports of any Ukrainian or European input into the making of this plan. Is this a case of the Europeans yet again being bypassed by Washington?
Yeah, well, it certainly looks like that. But what's been really interesting here at the foreign ministers' meeting is actually how little they reacted to the announcements of these plans. Kaja Kallas, in the press conference, she was frequently asked about whether the EU was being cut out of this, what it meant for the Ukrainians. We also, for instance, heard the Polish foreign minister, Sikorski. He came out. I pushed him quite hard to ask if there was a reaction from the Poles, and they said, listen, we are not going to be speaking about this if there is a peace plan, was his response to me. They don't want to fan the flames of this suggestion, this discussion that is ongoing. They want to make sure that the continued values that the Europeans have said that they uphold, which is that none of Ukraine's territory should be ceded in a peace plan, and that Ukraine would be involved in any peace plan that were to be agreed. That's been the position ever since the beginning of this war, and there's no budging on it. That's the position that we see coming out of the European ministers here at this meeting.
Okay, so they're choosing to remain silent, at least at that point, but it doesn't change the fact that there is talk now about a plan that has been presented to Ukraine. What leverage then does Europe have, especially with Russia?
Yeah, well, that's another issue that they've been discussing. First, this shadow fleet, so a fleet of unflagged, uninsured vessels which carry oil and other products across the borders and basically allow Russia to continue economic trade with partners around the world. We heard from Kaja Kallas. She said that since certain targeted measures on that shadow fleet were imposed, that 30% of the trade had dropped. Now, there's this ongoing rounds of sanctions. We're now looking at the 20th round of sanctions against Russia. And there's a broad understanding, even in EU circles, in the sort of corridors of power here in Brussels, that going through these big rounds of sanctions don't always work. So, and Kaja Kallas mentioned that. She talked about it. She said that actually doing these targeted measures on specific aspects, that is more important. And that's exactly what it looks like her thinking is, and what she'll continue to try and do, to try and end the economic, any trade that happens between the European Union and Russia. And that's something that we saw some of the other ministers talking about, really reducing any energy purchases and ending them entirely from Russia.
DW's Jack Parrott with the latest from Brussels tonight. Jack, as always, thank you.